In the last video, I broke down in great detail the difference between believing in God and believing Him. In this video, I will be discussing the similarity between the foolish man in James 2 and the faithless and perverse generation in Matthew 17. All that and more coming up. Hey there, it's Jeremy Grogan with Position Studios, a ministry aimed at building a community of believers who are positioned to take the message of Christ to others and to model Him everywhere. This is the 5th video in my series titled Position Through Faith Part 1. Links to the entire video series are provided in the description. Also, remember to subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss any videos in the series. And with that, let's dive right in. The previous video ended with a brief discussion about the foolish man in James 2:20. Now let's connect the foolish man to the disciples in Matthew 17. We find out that they could not cast out the demon from the boy because their generation was faithless and perverted. Let's review Matthew 17, verse 17. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me. This is literally Jesus' response to the disciples' vain attempt to heal the boy. So what does it mean to be perverse? The word translated perverse in this passage is the Greek verb diastrepho, which is derived from two words. Dia denoting separation, and strepho meaning to turn. Its general meaning is to turn or twist throughout. However, in the case of this passage, it is used in the perfect passive participle. When diastrepho is used in this way, it means perverted, corrupt, or vicious. Vicious meaning wicked. The connection we are making between the disciples in Matthew 17 and the foolish man in James 2 is that an amount of wickedness is credited to both failures. This is observed by the unavailing outcome in the disciples' attempt to heal the boy and the foolish man's proclamation of faith without the byproduct of works. I imagine at this point, both the disciples and this foolish man would claim that they believe in God, but the result of their activity demonstrates the opposite. From Matthew 17, verses 14 through 16, we observe that a man brought his son to the disciples in hopes that he could cure him of his epileptic condition. The King James reads lunatic, and other resources would refer to it as moonstruck. After the disciples' failed attempt to cure the boy, the man kneels before Jesus, notifies him that the disciples could not heal his son, then pleads his case. Jesus responds in verse 17 and 18 by announcing that their generation is faithless and perverted, and then he heals the boy. Next, in verse 19, the disciples ask Jesus an interesting question, which he answers in verse 20. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not cast it out? So Jesus said to them, Because of your unbelief. Can you imagine the discontentment and anguish that the disciples must have felt moments after Jesus said, Because of your unbelief? The disciples clearly did not consider themselves among the range of Jesus' initial rebuke to the faithless and perverse generation. This is why I find it interesting that they had to ask Jesus, Why could we not cast it out? Think about this. Jesus already addressed this to the whole crowd. In 2011, Damon Thompson stated, and this is a paraphrase, Ultimately, the disciples could not get out of the boy the faithless and perverse generation that was still in themselves. Additionally, the following commentary demonstrates that the disciples fell under the range of Jesus' rebuke. Commenting on the phrase, O faithless and perverse generation, in 1978, Charles Ellicott stated this, quote, The words were obviously addressed to both the scribes and the disciples. Both had shown their want of the faith, which uttered itself in prayer to the Father. Both were alike perverse in finding in the misery brought before them only an occasion of wrangling and debate. This was not the way to obtain the power to heal, and the formulae of exorcism were but an idle charm without the faith which they were meant to be the expression. End quote. Also, commenting on the phrase, because of your unbelief, Ellicott further stated, quote, The various reading, because of your little faith, found in many but not the most authoritative manuscripts, is interesting as an example of a tendency to tone down the apparent severity of the Lord's words. They show conclusively that the disciples themselves came under the range of his rebuke to the faithless and perverse generation. End quote. Please stay tuned as we take a short commercial break. Welcome back, everybody, and thanks for watching. Now let's continue. As presented in my chapter, the next section falls under the heading, Faith is to works as seed time is to harvest. What's interesting is that Jesus could have completed his response to the disciples by simply stating, because of your unbelief, and left it at that. That would have just answered the question. However, Jesus continues by illustrating the application and manifestation of this faith. Let's look at this in the Weymouth New Testament. Starting in verse 19b, why could we not expel the demon? Verse 20, because your faith is so small, he replied. For I solemnly declare to you that if you have faith like a mustard seed, you shall say to this mountain, remove from this place to that, and it will remove, and nothing shall be impossible to you. If I learned anything about the way this thing called Christianity works, it's that God is not necessarily or exclusively looking for our activity to produce results. He is ultimately looking for our activity and performance to be the result. If we actually have faith, it will be demonstrated through our activity. But if we don't have faith, if we don't believe, it will be demonstrated by activity that doesn't generate results, activity that generates negative results, or no activity at all. At this point in the narrative, the disciples would certainly claim to believe in Jesus, but once again, does their activity demonstrate they believe him? Now let's understand a little bit more about how this mustard seed faith fundamentally works. I discovered something interesting about the phrasing of a portion of this text. In the New King James, we observe the phrase, if you have faith as a mustard seed. The King James states, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed. In the King James Version, the word translated mustard seed is the Greek noun sinope. But the problem with this is that the word sinope has nothing to do with the seed. It plainly means mustard. So a deeper portion of my study revealed a word preceding sinope, which is the Greek masculine noun kokos. Kokos is a grain, a kernel, or a seed. This is significant, and I'll circle back to why this is in the middle of the next video. This brings us to the end of the 5th video in this series. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any new content. Thanks for watching, guys, and remember, many are called, but you are positioned.